Be me. I guess I should start by saying I thought my life was pretty much perfect about a year ago. I had a good job in marketing, a nice apartment downtown, and a boyfriend I'd been with for almost 2 years. He was a great guy, the kind of stable, solid man that your parents dream about for you. He worked in a technical field, something with data or servers. I never fully grasped the details. What mattered was that he was consistent. He was calm. He was the anchor to my kite, if that makes any sense. I was always the more spontaneous one, the one with the sharp sense of humor. At least, I always thought it was sharp. He was kind, patient, and had this quiet confidence that I found incredibly attractive. We met through a mutual friend at a casual get-together, one of those things I almost didn't go to. We just clicked. The conversation was easy. He actually listened, you know? Like, he wasn't just waiting for his turn to talk. He remembered little things I told him and would bring them up weeks later. We started dating, and it was one of the smoothest, most natural relationships I'd ever been in. There were no games, no drama. It was just comfortable, peaceful. Maybe, looking back, it was a little too peaceful for me. I think a part of me gets bored with stability. I have this urge to poke things, to see if they're real, to test the boundaries. It's a character flaw, I see that now. But at the time, I thought it was just part of my personality, my edge. The whole thing started so innocently. It wasn't planned, it just happened. It was probably a few months into our second year together. We were completely settled in, past the honeymoon phase and into the deep, comfortable rhythm of a long-term couple. One evening, we were making dinner together. He was in charge of the main course, and I was on salad duty. He was supposed to pick up a specific kind of cheese on his way home from work, a small, simple request. And he forgot. It wasn't a big deal at all. We could have the salad without it. He was so apologetic, though. You would have thought he'd forgotten our anniversary. He stood there in the kitchen, looking so genuinely sorry over a block of cheese. And that's when the thought popped into my head. I leaned against the counter, dried my hands on a towel, and gave him this playful, serious look. I told him this was a serious offense, a betrayal of culinary trust. He chuckled, thinking I was just being dramatic. Then I delivered the line, the one that would eventually unravel everything. I said something like, "You know, I could just call the police right now. Tell them you're being neglectful." I paused for effect, letting a little smirk play on my lips. And honestly, between a distraught woman and a guy who looks this guilty over cheese, who do you think they're going to believe? He just stared at me for a second. The smile on his face faltered. Then he let out this short, nervous laugh, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to find it funny. I laughed, a real laugh, and went over to give him a hug, telling him I was obviously kidding. The moment passed. We finished making dinner, and it was fine. But I remembered his reaction, that brief moment of uncertainty. And for some twisted reason, I found it fascinating. It felt like I'd discovered a new button to push, a new dynamic for our little inside world. So it became a thing, our joke. Anytime he made a small mistake, I'd pull it out. Left a wet towel on the bed? That's a hazard. I'll tell them you create an unsafe environment. Who do you think they'll believe? Shrunk one of my sweaters in the laundry by accident. Destruction of property. It's an open and shut case. I'll look so sad when I give my statement. Was 5 minutes late to pick me up. I was so worried. I thought something had happened. When I make the report, I'll say you have a history of being controlling and making me wait. And each time, I'd cap it with that little rhetorical question. Who would they believe? It was always said with a smile, always in a light, teasing tone. To me, it was clearly a joke. It was so over the top, so absurd, that it couldn't possibly be taken seriously. It was a parody of those crazy ex-girlfriend tropes. I thought it was clever, I thought it showed I had a dark, intelligent sense of humor. In the beginning, he would play along, albeit reluctantly. He'd roll his eyes and say something like, "Okay, you got me," or just shake his head with a little smile. But as the weeks turned into months, I noticed a shift. The reluctant smiles disappeared. He would just get quiet. He'd just stare at me with this blank expression that I couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something else. Something still and heavy. I, in my infinite wisdom, interpreted this as him losing his sense of humor. I thought he was becoming too serious, maybe stressed from work. It never once occurred to me that the joke itself was the problem. The first time I did it in front of our friends was a turning point. We were out for dinner, a group of maybe 6 of us. He was telling a story about a frustrating project at his job. He got a few of the technical details mixed up, and our friend, who also works in tech, gently corrected him. He laughed it off, saying he was tired and his brain was fried. I saw my opening. I leaned forward, put my hand on his arm, and said in a stage whisper loud enough for the table to hear, "See? He's getting confused. His story is inconsistent. That's exactly what I'd mentioned in my report." I smiled sweetly at him. And you know who they'd believe. There was a moment of awkward silence at the table. Then my best friend, who sat next to me, burst out laughing. She told me I was savage, that she couldn't believe I said that. She meant it as a compliment. A couple of the other people chuckled nervously. My boyfriend didn't. He just looked down at his plate. He didn't say another word for the rest of the conversation. On the way home, the car was silent. I tried to start a conversation, asking him if he had a good time. He just gave one-word answers. Yeah. It was fine. I finally asked him what was wrong, if he was upset about something. He was quiet for a long time, just watching the road. Then he said, "I just wish you wouldn't do that, especially not in front of our friends." I got defensive. I couldn't help it. I told him it was just a joke, that everyone knew it was a joke, that my friend thought it was hilarious. I accused him of being too sensitive, of not being able to take a little teasing. He didn't argue. He just sighed and said, "Okay." The rest of the drive home was thick with a tension I refused to acknowledge was my fault. I thought he was being moody. I thought he was trying to police my personality. That night, I remember lying in bed and feeling a little bit of resentment towards him. Why couldn't he just be more fun? Why did he have to take everything so personally? The joke didn't stop. If anything, I think I used it more, as if to prove a point, to prove that it wasn't a big deal and that he was overreacting. It became my go-to move whenever we had a minor disagreement. It was a way to shut down the argument and win by escalating it to an absurd level. If he said he didn't like the movie I picked, I'd tell him he was being emotionally coercive and that my testimony would be very compelling. If he wanted to spend a Saturday relaxing at home when I wanted to go out, I'd say he was trying to isolate me from my friends and that it's a classic red flag I could use against him. It was all nonsense, of course, hyperbole, but it worked. He would immediately drop the subject. He stopped disagreeing with me on the little things. He just complied. If I wanted to watch a certain movie, he'd say, "Sounds great." If I wanted to go to a certain restaurant, he'd say, "Whatever you want." He became incredibly agreeable and meticulous. He never forgot anything from the grocery store again. He never left a wet towel on the bed. His side of the closet was perfectly organized. The dishes were always done. It was like he was trying to be the perfect boyfriend to not give me any ammunition. And instead of feeling happy or appreciated, I found it deeply unsettling. The playfulness was gone. The banter, the gentle teasing that goes both ways in a healthy relationship, it all vanished. Our interactions became very careful, very deliberate. He was still kind, he was still attentive, but he felt distant, like he was holding a part of himself back. It felt like I was living with a polite and considerate roommate, not the man I fell in love with. The easy comfort we once had was replaced by a low-humming anxiety. The silence in our apartment was no longer peaceful. It was just empty. I remember one specific evening, maybe a few months after the dinner with our friends. We were sitting on the couch, watching some show. It was a quiet night. I made a casual comment about a trip I wanted to take in the fall. He didn't look up from the screen and said it sounded nice. I pressed him for more, asking if he was actually interested. He finally looked at me. His expression was just tired. So tired. He told me that of course he was interested, but that it was hard to get excited about planning things. I asked him why. He was quiet for a moment. Because it feels like everything I do is being evaluated, he said, so softly I almost didn't hear him. Like I'm constantly being graded on a pass-fail basis, and if I fail, there's a huge penalty. I knew exactly what he was talking about, and for the first time, a tiny crack appeared in my fortress of self-righteousness. A flicker of doubt. Was this joke doing more damage than I thought? But my ego was a powerful thing. It patched that crack up almost immediately. I convinced myself he was being dramatic, that he was mischaracterizing a harmless running gag, so I doubled down. I tried to make light of it. Well, I said with a forced laugh, just make sure you don't fail the test. The consequences are severe. I was hoping he'd laugh, that it would break the tension and we could go back to normal. He didn't laugh. He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. It wasn't sadness or anger. It was a genuine, unmistakable flicker of fear. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same tired, blank expression. But I saw it. He just said, I know. Then he got up, said he was going to bed, and left me alone on the couch. I sat there for a long time in the dark, the light from the TV flickering across the room. The silence was deafening. For the first time, I felt a cold dread creep into my heart. I realized that he didn't see me as a partner anymore. He saw me as a threat. I should have stopped then. I should have gone into the bedroom, woken him up, and apologized. Truly apologized. I should have promised to never, ever say anything like that again. But I didn't. I was too proud, too stubborn. I thought that if I apologized, it would be admitting that he was right and I was wrong. It would mean that my sharp, edgy humor was actually just cruelty. And I wasn't ready to face that. So I did nothing. I went to bed, and we pretended the conversation never happened. But something had fundamentally broken that night. We both knew it. We were just going through the motions. The next few weeks were the strangest of our entire relationship. He was the most perfect, considerate boyfriend imaginable. He'd text me during the day to see how I was doing. He'd have dinner ready when I got home from work. He suggested we go on a weekend trip to a place I'd mentioned wanting to visit months ago. On the surface, it looked like he was trying harder than ever, but it felt completely hollow. There was no warmth behind it, no intimacy. It felt like he was following a script, the How to Be a Good Boyfriend handbook. He was checking all the boxes, performing all the right actions, but his heart wasn't in it. He was so careful with his words. He never offered a strong opinion on anything. Everything was, that sounds good, or whatever you'd prefer is fine with me. He was building a wall around himself, brick by careful brick. And I was so focused on how his behavior was making me feel, lonely, disconnected, that I never stopped to think about why he was doing it. I thought he was punishing me with passive aggression. It turns out he wasn't building a wall. He was building an exit strategy. The end came on a Tuesday, a completely normal, unremarkable Tuesday. I remember it was raining that day, a dreary gray sky that matched the atmosphere in our apartment. I came home from a long day at work, feeling exhausted and just wanting to curl up on the couch. I walked in and knew immediately that something was wrong. The air was different, still. On the coffee table, neatly stacked, were his library books that were due back. His favorite coffee mug, the one I'd gotten him for his birthday, was washed and sitting upside down on the drying rack, not in the cupboard. Little things. Things that were out of place for a normal evening. I called his name. No answer. I walked into the bedroom, and that's when I saw it. His side of the closet was empty. The drawers on his dresser were all slightly ajar and also empty. His toothbrush and toiletries were gone from the bathroom. It was a slow, dawning horror. It wasn't a process. It was a sudden, cold realization. He was gone. He had packed up his life and moved out while I was at work. I just stood there in the middle of the room, my work bag still on my shoulder, unable to process it. There was no fight, no dramatic confrontation, no tearful goodbye, just a silent, efficient departure. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from him. My hands were shaking so much I could barely unlock the screen. The text message was long. It wasn't angry or emotional. It was calm and methodical, which was somehow so much worse. It felt like I was reading a project summary or a final report, not a breakup message from the man I loved. He started by saying he was sorry for doing it this way, but he didn't see any other path. A face-to-face conversation, he explained, would have just led to an argument where I would dismiss his feelings as an overreaction. He was right. That's exactly what I would have done. The message then laid it all out. It wasn't about the jokes hurting his feelings. It was about what the jokes represented. He wrote that trust was the most important thing to him in a relationship. Not just trust that I wouldn't cheat, but trust that I had his back. Trust that I was on his team. He explained that my joke wasn't a joke to him because it wasn't based on fantasy. It was based on a terrifying reality for men that he was acutely aware of. He told me that every time I said it with a smile on my face, I was communicating one simple fact, that I held the power to completely and irrevocably destroy his life, and that I found that power amusing. I remember my hands getting colder as I read that line. He said he couldn't live with that. He couldn't build a future with someone who saw his entire life, his career, his reputation, his family's honor, his very freedom, as a punchline. He said it was like living with someone who playfully holds a lighter to the curtains every day. They might never actually drop it, but you can never, ever relax. You can never feel safe in your own home. The final part of the message was what truly gutted me. He wrote, "I'm not leaving because I'm hurt. I'm leaving because I have to protect myself. This is a risk management decision. The potential downside of staying with someone who thinks like you do is infinite. I hope one day you understand." There was no, "I'll miss you." No, "I'll always love you." It ended with, "The key is on the counter. Goodbye." I sank onto the edge of the bed, the phone slipping from my fingers. My first reaction was pure, white-hot rage. A risk management decision. He was breaking up with me like I was a bad stock investment. How could he be so cold, so clinical, so insulting? I grabbed my phone and called him. It went straight to voicemail. His voice, his cheerful, recorded greeting, was like a ghost in the room. I called again. Voicemail, and again. Voicemail. He had blocked my number. That's when the anger curdled into a kind of frantic panic. I called my best friend. I was sobbing so hard I could barely get the words out. I told her everything. How I came home to an empty apartment. How he left because of a stupid running joke. She was instantly on my side, of course. That's what friends are for. She said he was a coward for leaving like that. She said he was clearly too sensitive and couldn't handle a strong woman with a sharp wit. She said I was better off without someone who couldn't take a joke. Her words were like a balm on my wounded ego. I clung to them. Yes, that was it. He was the problem. He was weak. I was too much for him. For the next week or so, that's the story I told myself. It was the only thing that kept me from completely falling apart. I went through the motions of life. I went to work. I saw my friends. I talked a big game about how liberating it was to be free from someone so fragile. But when I came home to the apartment, the silence was a physical weight. His absence was everywhere. The empty space on the couch where he used to sit. The other side of the bed that was now always cold. The brand of coffee he liked that was still in the cupboard. Every little thing was a reminder. I started to notice how much of my life was intertwined with his. The shows we watched together, the restaurants we loved, the inside jokes that now only I remembered. The anger started to fade, replaced by a deep, aching loneliness. I missed him. I missed his calm presence. I missed his quiet laugh. I missed feeling safe and anchored. I found myself rereading his text message over and over again. A risk management decision. The phrase echoed in my head. It was so detached, so unlike the warm, caring man I knew. What could possibly make him think in those terms? About a month after he left, I was having one of those nights. It was late. I couldn't sleep. The silence in the apartment was screaming at me. I was just scrolling aimlessly through the internet, falling down the usual rabbit holes of celebrity gossip and cooking videos. Then the algorithm served me something different. It was a video clip of a well-known psychologist giving a lecture. The title was something like "The Asymmetry of Power in Modern Relationships." I don't know why I clicked on it. Morbid curiosity, maybe. The man in the video started talking about social dynamics. He spoke in a calm, academic tone about the default assumption of female victimhood and male guilt in society. He discussed how, in any he said, she said scenario, the institutional bias almost always favors the woman's account, regardless of evidence. He wasn't angry or hateful. He was just laying it out like a mathematical formula. And it made me deeply uncomfortable. My first instinct was to click away, to dismiss it as bitter nonsense from some fringe corner of the internet. But then he said something that made me freeze. He said, "For many men today, the person they should fear most is not a stranger in a dark alley, but the woman they share a bed with, because she has the power, with a single uncorroborated accusation, to erase his entire existence." His entire existence. My boyfriend's text message flashed in my mind. The potential downside is infinite. A cold dread started to spread through my chest. I opened a new tab and started searching. I started with neutral terms. False accusation statistics. Divorce court bias. That led me to forums, to blog posts, to news articles. I fell into a world I never knew existed. I read stories from men, hundreds of them. Men who lost their jobs because of a baseless HR complaint from a coworker they rejected. Men who were kicked out of their universities because of accusations that were later proven false, but only after their academic careers were ruined. Men who were financially crippled in divorce court, losing their homes and their savings. Men who lost custody of their children based on claims that were never substantiated. Men who had spent years and tens of thousands of dollars fighting to clear their names. Some who never could. It was a flood of stories, all different, but all echoing the same terrifying theme. Their lives had been destroyed by a single person's word. I stayed up all night, my face illuminated by the glow of the screen. I read about men who became meticulously careful in their interactions. They avoided being alone in a room with a female colleague. They insisted all important conversations happen over email to create a paper trail. They installed dash cams in their cars. They weren't being paranoid. They were managing risk. A risk management decision. It hit me like a physical blow. I finally understood. I pulled up his text message again, and this time I read it with new eyes. His words weren't cold. They were terrified. My joke wasn't just a bad joke. It was a reminder of this world I'd just discovered, a world he was already living in. Every time I smiled and said, "Who do you think they'll believe?" I wasn't being witty. I was pointing a loaded gun at his head and telling him how funny it was that my finger was on the trigger. I was confirming his worst fears about the world. I was telling him that yes, the system is rigged, and I know it, and I think it's hilarious. I thought back to his behavior in those last few months, his agreeableness, his meticulous perfection. He wasn't being passive-aggressive. He was trying to demine the field. He was walking on eggshells, desperately trying not to step on anything that would give me an excuse to detonate the bomb I was so fond of joking about. The time he asked me to stop, when he looked so tired on the couch, he wasn't being sensitive. He was pleading with me. He was giving me a final chance to show him that I was a safe person, that I was his partner, not his potential executioner. And what did I do? I laughed at him. I called him fragile. I told him the consequences were severe. I saw that flicker of fear in his eyes, and I ignored it. The realization was so profound, so complete, that I felt physically sick. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the person staring back. Who was this person who took pleasure in her partner's fear? Who found the idea of wielding such destructive power to be a source of amusement? My friend was wrong. I wasn't a strong woman. I was a bully. And my boyfriend wasn't weak or sensitive. He was intelligent. He was rational. He saw a clear and present danger to his life, and he did the only logical thing. He removed it. He didn't run from a joke. He escaped a threat. I left the bathroom and sat on the floor of the empty living room, hugging my knees to my chest. The sun was starting to rise, casting a pale gray light through the windows. The apartment was still silent. But for the first time, I understood that I deserved the silence. It's been almost a year now. I never heard from him again. I tried sending one last email a few months ago, a long one where I apologized for everything and told him that I finally understood. He never replied. I don't blame him. My edgy humor is gone. I don't make those kinds of jokes anymore. I can't. Because I now know that for some people, it's not a joke at all. It's the sound of a nightmare they're trying to avoid living. He was the best man I've ever known, and I drove him away because I was too arrogant to see that some things are too serious to ever be a punchline. I thought I was being clever. In reality, I was just a fool.